Vice Chair, please.
Thank you. Yes, I have a question regarding the bypass flows. And Mr. Bevins, I think you did a good job walking us through the order and focusing on the burden of proof and not sufficient evidence, to support additional flows. But as you were, I just didn't think of this when we were briefed on this issue. So would like for you to just spend a little bit of time to talk about where an enforcement proceeding on additional flow that takes into consideration public trust, where that may end, and our other authorities through water quality with respect to in-stream flows would take over. So it just strikes me in looking at that footnote that, maybe it's overly broad in that it gives the impression, if the evidence were there, that we would necessarily act. But I have, maybe pause on that, because I think that there would be a need, if we wanted to go further in this order, that, it should be maybe through a different proceeding with a scientific basis report and in-stream flow studies, et cetera. So if you could please comment on that.
Sure. Well, and hopefully this answers the question. There's a fundamental difference between what you can do under your regulatory authority in terms of establishing in-stream flows for a particular stream or a system, and your authority to do so in an adjudicative proceeding. In an adjudicative proceeding like this one, your decision is limited to the facts and evidence that are presented before you, and your decision needs to follow those facts. It can't go outside that process. There's a very defined hearing process, and eventually the hearing ends. Right, the hearings have to end at some point, and you're required to make a decision based on the evidence before you. Your regulatory authority, I think, can be a little bit more supple and longer lasting in terms of process, more iterative, and so there's a little bit more, at least in my view, flexibility compared to a case like this one, where the parties present evidence and arguments based on what they think things look like, and you're limited to that evidence, and the hearing has to end at some point. Certainly when I was in private practice, hindsight is always 2020. You get through a hearing, you think you put everything out there, and it turns out that the decision maker has other thoughts about things, and if the parties don't want to have a more iterative process like they didn't in this case, it makes it very challenging to develop an evidentiary record for imposing a different type of bypass flow. So certainly there could be, the fact that you're potentially going to adopt an order in this enforcement proceeding doesn't prevent the enforcement division from bringing another enforcement proceeding and developing that evidence. I do think we're going to see quite a bit more water in the Stanshaw Creek system if this order is adopted, and so there will be an opportunity to look at that and reevaluate as needed. But yeah, Vice Chair, I think there's quite a bit more flexibility to develop the science via an iterative process through the exercise of your regulatory authority. And that's not to say that adjudicative proceedings don't have their advantages as well, but in terms of developing requirements like this one, there are also some advantages to a more regulatory process.
Thank you.